Connellan, how are you, mate?
We're back.
This is number 4.
Yeah.
Exciting. The evolution. Today, not so many plans. I just thought it'd be fun to have you on again, have a chat. I feel like so much has happened I feel like the front end of this year, we spent so much time together because we had heaps of speaking staff, and I feel like just the last 3 months has gotten away from us.
You're right.
Life.
We've grown apart. We've moved further away. Things have happened.
You moved an extra 15 minutes south,
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden we're a world apart. But that was exciting news. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Bought a new
Exciting news
home.
for you. Congratulations. Got engaged.
Yeah, plenty happening. This is life.
It is.
Which is really exciting. And I guess that's what today I wanted to chat about. Just see where you're at, ask you some questions, have some fun and riff. There's something that I think you'll be able to speak to. I seen this incredible post this morning. I'll read it to you. I saved it on my phone. And I guess we were just talking about before we hit record how like all self-help and all thoughts and all advice needs to be taken with a grain of salt because every individual is different. And I seen this Charles Bukowski quote, who I believe was a poet, a writer, and has a lot of deep thoughts and seems to be a guy who felt deeply. Everything he writes has a tone of sadness to it.
It's tragic, yeah.
Yeah, but I felt something about this morning. I shared it on my story. The quote is, "And when nobody wakes you up in the morning and when nobody waits for you at night, and when you can do whatever you want, what do you call it? Freedom or loneliness?" I was like, it's a really deep thought, because there is you're married, I'm engaged, we both have partners who we love and have positive experiences with. And I was thinking about that because I had the polar opposite just before I met Soph of, like, I felt so lonely in so many areas of my life, not alone because I had great people around me, but I was having life experiences and doing exciting things. And I still remember the month before I met Soph, like I'd gone down to Melbourne with mates to run a marathon. I got invited to Government House to accept an award and have some fun experiences around that. Then I went over and travelled the US for 2 weeks by myself and had all these like cool memories and moments and funny stories to come back and tell. But there was this tone the whole time of, I'd really like to experience this with somebody I love, like a sense of loneliness. And so I was thinking about that quote and I'm like, to me, not having anyone to wake up to in the morning or anyone to go to bed with at night wasn't freedom, it was loneliness. And it's maybe different for everyone, because I'm sure there's somebody who will say, that's freedom to me. But I'm like, we all perceive life differently.
Definitely. I've always thought when it comes to those experiences, like the experiences for me personally are always better shared. Like we were talking earlier today about how the good thing about getting engaged is you do get to share that with people. It brings people together, and that's a completely different circumstance than waking up alone or whatever that feels like to a person. But I think it just shows that there's different ways to look at a lot of things, whether that be something as, in a way, kind of poetic and tragic as the Charles Bukowski piece that you wrote, or even if it's just the way in which you look at your life and your experiences. I think it's something that a lot of people probably don't take much of a moment to step back and look at what those moments actually mean to them are. And that's why I always talk about one of the better things you can do as a human is to reflect. And if you can write down how you feel about certain things, you'll be able to identify whether it is loneliness or whether it is something that you enjoy doing because it's for yourself. It's not really until you can step back and identify that you'll find some sort of answers. But at the end of the day, it could all just be meaningless, and like they're just moments, and that's your stage in life that you'll be able to look back on either fondly or tragically at some sort of point. But what I do love about that quote, and something that I've tended to really enjoy lately, I think because of the writing, is it's one thing to have thoughts, but it's another thing to express them in a way that is like the words that we use have meaning, and to express something poetically where it not only gets a message across but it sounds beautiful is something that I wish I could do a lot better. Not because I think it's nice for people to be able to quote, but I think it does show the significance in the words that we use, and it's something that I've learned a lot through writing, is you can write a sentence, but if you can actually write a sentence well it has such a difference in how your experience or your ideas are portrayed. And I think that's a great one to bring up because of that.
How do you think you get to that point where you learn to better express how you feel? Not always for, in our case, because of what we do, sometimes it's for other people's benefit too. But I think for the average person who doesn't necessarily want to share that with anyone else, but wants to understand the way they feel and is sitting down a journal every morning or every night, or maybe they're in the car and they've got that 15 minutes where there's no music on and they're contemplating how they feel about the current state of their reality. How do you think you get to a point where you're able to fully understand what you feel and articulate it?
I don't know if you'll ever fully understand. I think it changes quite a lot as well. It's like how we were talking earlier about how, certain parts of your story or what you talk about and the meaning of it can change over time. I think the way in which you're comfortable with your feelings and your emotions changes quite a lot as well. But I think it's not until you actually put some time and some effort into that reflection that you'll actually start to realize it. And I'm really big on gratitude and journaling, something I do every single morning. I write down 3 things I'm grateful for, 1 thing I learned from the day before, and any other thoughts that I might have. And I'm not someone that's going to push that upon anyone because that's what works for me. I just think it's great to start with a blank space and to get some things down. And how you do that's probably going to change over time. But one of the better things that I do is at the end of every year, I'll actually look back and see some of the favorite things that I've learned and some of the things that I'm grateful for, and see what pops up regularly and also what changes. And inevitably things change. It's amazing what changes over such a short amount of time. Like over 3 months, so much can change. And I think that goes to speak to, you can sit there with your thoughts in your car, or you can write some things down, and you might think you have a handle on it one day, but then the world around you changes, your relationships change, everything within your life can change over a short amount of time, and what you thought you understood or had a handle on before could then be completely different. I think the stage you want to get to is being okay with those things changing, but being aware that they are going to change and that you can actually change with them. Like, you don't have to be stubbornly rigid in the person that you are in the world that you're living in. Like, I think that's one of the good things about life is that, and kind of going back to that quote that you said, the way in which you perceive that could change. And I think that's something that a lot of people as human beings do kind of get to over time. It just takes figuring out how that works for you in order to kind of land in a certain space where you can make sense of it. But it's a long process. Like, I wouldn't say you or I necessarily have a handle on it over other people. I also think there's, in some cases, benefits to maybe being a step removed from it and maybe not looking into it as deeply as what other people do, because you can tie yourself up in knots over. Have you ever found yourself in a position where you're kind of, almost too deeply invested in everything that's going on that it takes away that meaning?
100%. There's a James Clear quote that I've been thinking about a lot the last 6 months. It probably, when I read it for the first time, it made sense to me, but it probably didn't resonate the way that it does at the moment. The tighter you cling to your current identity, the harder it is to grow beyond it. And I think there is people talk about the big 3 questions of life. The first being, like, who am I? What do I want? And how do I get there? Right? And I think sometimes our efforts to answer the first question, who am I? Like, what is my identity? Like, who am I in this world? Who am I to myself? Who am I to the people around me? Because that's often different. That we're so hell-bent on answering that question that we become so rigid in the answer, because we're looking for some sort of understanding. We're looking to understand ourselves better. We're looking to understand our place in the world. And so we start to define ourselves or understand ourselves as the role that we are at work, or who we are to somebody else in our life, because that's been explained to us and that feels more tangible. But I'm trying to become less rigid with it and just go, like, this is ever evolving. When did we decide that we're supposed to stop evolving, that we're supposed to have this clear picture of who we are at all times? And so I notice that I become more confused by it the less I reflect on it. Like, so for me, it's really important to sit down and journal. For me, it's really important to almost dump the thoughts I have on my mind and the questions on paper so that I can step back from them for a moment and reflect. When it's all in my head, sometimes it's just confusing. It's just like a whirlpool of thoughts and ideas. And I was speaking on the pod a couple months back to a mate of mine, Ali Tarai, and Ali spoke about like true meditation is the ability to get to one level or one layer of thought at a time. And I rarely feel like I'm there. Like I feel like I have thought and feeling on top of thought and feeling, and that's like confusing because life is busy. So I'm trying to get better at putting stuff down on paper or jotting something down in my notes and being able to remove myself from it, but then not forget to come back and reflect on it.
Yeah, I think the coming back part is such a key step to that. Is there anything that like I've actually started to try and, rather than just ask a question of someone and get the answer, like what's an example of maybe an area in your life where you have grown or changed and you've maybe come back to that and seen the difference, whether it's been good or bad? Because I think that's worth pointing out, and it's something that I'm interested in because I can think of certain things within my life, but a lot of the times it's kind of connected to an event or a significant change. Like I look at the shark attack as being such a big one where so much of my life changed, but that's because of this specific event. I think it's harder to maybe identify those if there isn't that line in the sand or that big moment. I wonder if you got any.
Yeah, I do. Trying to think of the best way to articulate this. So I would say that Facebook and Instagram, particularly Facebook, I don't really use Facebook for anything other than to look at the memories from the years before, like the things that happened on that day, because it encourages me to reflect. And one thing I've noticed is there was a period of me leaving my job in 2020, which was around the same time I'd started the podcast and started training for the first marathon. All that happened within the space of a couple months, where I think more than I realized at the time, a lot of it was rooted in this desire to be understood and validated by other people. There was this want, or almost this cry for help, in the sense that I wanted people to say, hey, you're valuable, or you're good at this thing, or you are talented, or you can be loved by a significant other. There was this part of me that kept putting stuff out into the world that was almost screaming for attention. And I don't think I realized it at the time, because it was just me doing what I felt like my brain was telling me to do. And I, at the time, as I mentioned, felt particularly lonely because I didn't ever think I'd have a significant other in my life. I felt confused because this thing that I thought was going to be my professional dream forever, something I hated and despised at that point in time. My health was out of check and I felt like my life was in a lot of chaos. Like the only real order I had was the people in my life that I loved, like my family and my mates. And so there was so much that I was questioning about myself. And I look back when those memories pop up now and I'm like, far out, mate. You were crying for attention.
Yeah.
Dye my hair leopard print. like a Britney fucking Spears moment,
Yeah.
Like I was crying for attention. And I was coming up with excuses and ways to mask that from, mate. And I think a lot of it was unconscious. Like I was masking it to make it not look like it was an attention-seeking endeavor, but like it was just something that I was leaning into because I was a bit carefree, but it wasn't the case. And I look back and reflect on that now. And I heard Jay Shetty say it once. Someone asked him a question, what's something you used to value that you no longer do? And he said, being understood. And I don't know that I'm fully there, but I think when you have someone in your life who really loves you for the truest and most authentic expression of you, your need to exhibit a persona to anyone else kind of dwindles away. It's actually funny because the thing that I wrote on that Bukowski quote as like my thought around it was, there is freedom to be found in partnership, to express and accept who you are and be loved by another in your most authentic form is a beautiful freedom to experience. There's an Aubrey Marcus quote that says, the persona is incapable of feeling love, it can only feel praise. So no matter the level of praise the persona experiences, if detached from the truth, it will almost always experience loneliness of never truly being understood. Love and freedom are just two sides of the same coin. This is just how I feel. And there was certainly a part of me that was kind of like screaming for the opportunity to be completely myself in front of someone else. And credit to Soph for being so amazing and kind and loving that she allowed me to feel comfortable doing that. And so now, because I feel loved for who I am, and I felt that with my family and my closest friends, but you really feel that, like, your family bring you into this world. So there's a bond from the start of your life that you have with your family that is almost through thick and thin. We are here for you, and you're evolving and you're growing into your own person as you become an adult. But when you're an adult and you meet someone at that point in your life where you're questioning a lot of things and they love you for who you are, there's a freedom that you experience in that love, because you're like, I'm allowed to be fully myself. Yeah. Like, nobody sees the side of me that Soph sees when I'm like running around the house like a silly goose, because people would think I'd lost my mind if I acted the way I do around her in public. Yeah. So there's a freedom in that where I feel that my persona plays less of a part in my life now because I'm so comfortable at home. And that's a great feeling. So I'd say that is probably one of the things that has dramatically changed. But in that, we spoke about this morning, in that peace that you have, you also don't want to lose the ambition to challenge yourself and strive to try new things in your professional life and out there in the world. And so it's finding the balance between that I think is really important. I don't know how you feel about that, like when you're reflecting on these challenges you feel and experience, like how much of you feels, like what's the balance? I'm trying to think of the way to word this. What's the balance between the comfort you feel in being who you are at home, but also striving to figure out what else could be true for you out in the world?
I think the balance is something that always, I'm sure it can be achieved, but I think it's a really hard thing to try and actually find, because I think as humans, you always want to strive for something that's comfortable. Like that's, I think the natural state that we want to rest at is something where we're not strained and we feel ourselves and we don't feel like we're trying to, be, overly out there trying to achieve something, whatever it might be. And I'm sure that can look completely different for everyone. But I know for me, in my personal experience, almost all of the best things that I can look back on in my life with some sort of pride is something that has taken me outside of my comfort zone, whether that be by choice or by chance. And I think that's something where, as a human who wants to continue to develop and, leave a mark on this world in whatever way, shape and form that is, I know I'm going to have to continue to push myself, whether that be through work or physical endeavors or even emotionally, like within my relationship. I think they're all things where you need to put yourself in that uncomfortable position from time to time. And I know that's something that you've heard from so many different people. Like, being uncomfortable is actually great for us as humans because it forces us to stretch and you find where your limits are. And that is entirely healthy in most cases for us as human beings. But there is definitely that warmth that you feel in being comfortable in your own skin or within a relationship or with the achievements that you have as well. And I think that's something that, regardless of what you're doing, I've learned a lot when it comes to, like, a big part of what I talk about up on stage is, getting people to set lofty goals, because it was such a big part in helping me overcome the shark attack and do so much in my life today. And when it comes to guiding other people to set lofty goals and to be ambitious, you can't necessarily just force them to, well, you definitely can't force someone to do it, but you can't force them to do it just by saying, hey, it worked for me, it should work for you as well. Because a lot of people come to it can be hard to step out of the box. It can be hard to get outside of your comfort zone. It can be hard to put yourself out there and set a lofty goal because there's fear associated with that. There's fear of failure and judgment and all these things. And I found it really hard when I'd go and speak to all these people and you'd be like, so what are your goals? And they're like, oh, I'm not really sure. Like, I'm not quite ready to set one yet. And if I did catch up with people who had set goals and they'd chase them, and that's one of the great things about my job is you get people reaching back out that'd be like, oh, I've gone and done this and it's been amazing. Like it's been a really valuable experience to push myself like this. And because of the person that I am, I would always be like, okay, well, what's the next goal then? And they'd be like, the next goal, like I've just achieved like one of the things that has been like, burning at me for so long. Like I'm completely satisfied having just done that. And I think as humans, there are different levels to stepping outside of your comfort zone. And one of the things that I learned from a few of those experiences was the ability to actually step back and to be proud of what you've done and to actually sit there in the glory of achievement. And I think you have to acknowledge that. You can't just continually go on to the next thing and on to the next thing, on to the next thing, because then what are they worth? Kind of almost devalues the purpose of doing that. Like the ability to actually sit back and not only be happy with what you've done, but to thank other people for helping you get there. And then to also figure out what you've learned from that, I think that's the value in doing it. So the ability to continually push yourself as a human is great, but the balance, which is the question that you asked at the start, I guess, is the ability to take a step back and to not always put the pressure on yourself to be out there outside of your comfort zone. I think there is definitely value in being within yourself and being comfortable in the person that you are right here and right now. And that's something that I've definitely learned a lot when it comes to helping other people set goals and to be a better version of themselves is everyone, like, and this is again, like everyone's different, take everything with a grain of salt, but there's definitely different levels to where that balance might lie for everyone. So it's about finding where that balance is for you. But I think just the ability to take a step back and to be proud of what you've done is one of the best things that you can do. And you're probably feeling that right now. It's like I was lucky enough to congratulate you on, getting engaged today. And I don't know how open you've been about this on the podcast, but I'm sure you'd consider that like a major life goal of yours. Like it's something that, as you said, you didn't think you were ever going to be able to do. And I know you've talked openly with me about it before, about how like that, raising a family, these are all things that mean so much to you. Yeah. So first of all, congratulations on achieving one of the biggest goals that you've ever set for yourself. And I guess it's kind of weird to call it a goal because it almost gamifies love, but it is something that you strive for. And I guess the ability to sit back and reflect on what that means for you and for Soph and for your family, like that must feel good now.
It's very special. We spoke about it earlier. I think in a healthy relationship, not much changes when you get engaged, because I would like to think that most people, like I did, I valued Soph and treated Soph like she was my wife early on in our relationship because we had that bond and that love. So not a lot changes to the dynamic of your everyday, but it's certainly a really special moment to be able to share that with your partner. And that might not resonate with everyone. I know people have different views around marriage and engagements and the commitments of relationship. But for me personally, it was something that meant a lot to me, and I knew meant a lot to both of us, for me to be able to get down on one knee and ask Soph to marry me and to be my wife was like a really special feeling. Probably the most special thing about it is the memory and the story of it that we get to reminisce on forever. And like having I don't know if anyone fully knows the story, but I had all of our family come and surprise her for lunch almost immediately after. And for the 12 of us, her brother was the only one who couldn't be there. For all of us to be sitting there talking about that moment and reminiscing on not just that morning, but the year and a half, nearly 2 years that we've been together, and how our families have come together, and for her mum and dad to talk about me coming into their family, and for my family to talk about the way that Soph has fit into ours, was it was a really beautiful experience. It was easily the best day of my life. Yeah. And to then enjoy that and to sit in that was special and certainly worth it. Yeah. Right. And so I think it's different for everyone how you experience it. But for me, it was really special to recognize it. As I reflected, the couple days, we went away for a couple days post, We just had this like nice little Airbnb on a rural property. And we were driving into, it was sort of 50 minutes to Bowral from where we were staying. We'd drive in and we'd have some dinner one day or some lunch, and we'd sit around the fire. We had a little wood fire in our Airbnb and a spa on the deck. And we'd sit there and just like reflect and talk and chat. And I was like, this is really special, because I didn't know that I'd ever experience this. And I feel like so much in my life has changed in the last 2 years. It's kind of crazy to look back on the reality of before I met her and how much has changed for the better, and all the challenges we've experienced in our lives along the way, but how much closer it's made us. So I think, it's a special feeling, and it's certainly, like you said, it's weird. I actually ticked it off my goal list, which does make it sound a little bit gamified and unusual in that sense. But I think there's a lot to be said for, like you said, embracing those special milestones of your life and being able to celebrate them and being able to recognize that it is meaningful. It is meaningful to achieve these things along the way and have these experiences. Otherwise, what's the point of life?
Yeah, exactly.
If you can't enjoy it.
Yeah.
And we forget that so much, because enjoyment doesn't necessarily sit high up on the hierarchy of success. When most people speak about the success of their life or like those major milestones and goals, they talk about how it changed the trajectory of their life and how there was blood, sweat, tears and sacrifice. And so in the end, it was all worthwhile. But like the thing that's worthwhile about a relationship is just every day.
Yeah.
Like being able to experience life with another person.
So like we talk about the definition of success and how much your relationship in this means to you. Like if you were to step back now and kind of rank is probably a strange word to use, but like rank some of the biggest things that you've achieved or the things that you're most proud of, like would this be, you're probably going to say it for Soph's sake, that it'd be like top number one, of course, but like it's not about saying it for that reason, but it'd have to be up there as far as what it means to you as a human when you look back on what you've achieved in life, right?
Easily the biggest thing, because absolutely every element of it was like, there was a part of the marathon, right, the first one, that was like, it was for me to show myself what I was capable of, but there was almost an element of it that was performative too, because it's in front of other people, and it's going to be like, there was no part of my motivation to get engaged or to be in a relationship that was about anyone else but us two.
Yeah.
And so it felt so true and so honest. And I was so last night I drove out to meet a couple mates for dinner. One of my mates is getting married in a couple of weeks, and he's having like a low-key bucks, and they'd been to paintball, a couple of the boys, during the day, actually quite a good big group of lads. But I was working during the day, so I just went out and have some dinner and watch a footy with them. And as I was driving back home, I was thinking about relationship. I've been talking to my mates about marriage, and we've just been engaged, so they're asking questions. And I was thinking about relationship, and I've always spoken about values and how important values are to me. And I've always spoken about things like it's important to, whilst being selfless in relationships and with the people you love, and in every area of our life, it's important to be selfless. There's also a huge importance on being selfish to make sure that you don't lose the sense of yourself, or you don't lose the parts of you that made you valuable to the people in your life in the first place. So it's easier to go, well, I'm just going to be super selfless, and then all of a sudden you've lost your health because you haven't looked after yourself. And a lot of parents experience this, right? They look after their kids with every ounce and energy of their being, but they've stopped exercising, and all of a sudden they can't run around with their kids anymore, or they're sick and their future is in question. And all of a sudden, like, the reason that your kids like were able to experience you fully as a parent is being taken away from you all. And so there is an importance to being selfish and looking after yourself in the process of, or in your relationships and in your connections to the people you love. And the way that I'm wired as a person, everyone who's important to me, I just immediately put them ahead of myself. And some of that is people-pleasing tendencies, but a lot of it is just I have such a deep care and love for my people, because of the way that I've grown up, and likely because I'm a product of my parents.
Yeah.
That it's so easy for me to put everyone else ahead of myself. And I feel that in my relationship. Like I want to make Soph happy. I want to make sure that everything I do is good for her. But I'm so lucky. And what makes me so certain that I found the right person is she is so quick to stop me and make sure that I don't lose a sense of myself.
Yeah.
She's so quick to say, I know that the only day we get off together is this Friday, but I know that you've got to record 2 pods, so make sure you record the 2 pods because that's important to you. She's so quick to say, hey, I know that I'm not going to get to see her the next couple of days and that you just want to like go for a walk with me, but I know you said you wanted to go to the gym this week, so you should probably go to the gym and we can just do a walk later. Like she's so good at reminding me to take care of myself. And I think that's the best part of our relationship is you can feel really confident when you know your partner has your best interests at heart too. And that's the balance of it, is she never wants to take care of herself because she wants to take care of me, and I have to remind her to do that.
Yeah.
And so we're lucky that we have that.
Well, I guess that it kind of goes to show the value of having someone like that in your life. And that's probably why you don't feel lonely. Like you feel incredibly connected now because you have someone like that. If Soph wasn't in your life and you didn't have someone like that, what do you think you would be able to do? Or is there anything that you do when Soph isn't around or she's at work or you're at work when you do need to gain that perspective? Like, is there anything that you would recommend or that you do in a moment like that? Or is that something that you're glad that Soph is there for? Otherwise you'd be running out there people pleasing and maybe losing track of yourself and your health and all these other things.
I think something she reminded me of, like it's been a busy year for me, right? Working my job full time, keeping on top of the pod, went through a good stage of speaking there for a while where a fair bit was happening, and I felt like there was so much happening in my life, and I was just I remember going through a 4-month period where I didn't have a day off. I literally could not remember last time I spent time by myself. And I was supposed to record a Sunday pod, and she works every Sunday, and it got cancelled last minute. It was like a nice sunny day, and I remember I was like, oh God, what do I do? Do I try and find someone short notice for a pod? And she said to me, why don't you just go and spend some time by yourself? You need it. And I went out and I took myself to the gym. I went and had a swim. I got myself a coffee. And one of my favourite things to do at the moment is I'll go out to Thirroul, go to the gym just before, have a swim in the ocean. I get myself a half a rock melon from the fruit shop in Thirroul, and I get a coffee at Finbox, and I sit in the sun and just eat and chill and write and listen to some music. And as I was sitting there, I was like, oh, when I'm actually spending some solo time, it's probably the best reflection I have, to be like by myself and to think about, what do I need right now? Where am I exhausting myself? What in my life is just a tick box exercise as opposed to something that is fulfilling and meaningful? And so I have to, and have been better at it lately, reminding myself to go and take myself for that coffee by myself for no other reason than just to be in tune with what I need. And so I'm getting better at that. I'm getting better at like just taking a little bit of selfish time during the week. And I heard, like, I think everyone's got their own rituals with this. I heard Rogan talking about it recently, a guy who's as busy as he is. He was saying that he just needs that like one day or even half day a week just to be a bloody vegetable on the lounge and just scroll Instagram and like do some archery and just like re-energize.
Well, I think that there's definitely value in that, and talk about leaning into like your own self and the parts that you probably wouldn't show to everyone. Like what you spoke about, being able to go grab a coffee, go for a swim, go to the gym, write down your thoughts, is a really nice sounding thing to do. But I'm sure there's a lot of people that listen to that and be like, mate, does this dude ever switch off? Like writing down your thoughts, like he's always in touch with his emotion. Like, does he ever like sit down and just like scroll through his phone or whatever? And I'm sure everyone does, but I think that's where like leaning into the person that you are kind of helps you find what that is. Like I'm lucky that surfing gives me that bit of escape from, you know, where you're out there by yourself, and I love to be able to do that, but the waves aren't always good.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have something different. I've started to, rather than, I had this routine in the morning where I would always wake up really early and use that time to try and get ahead of work. And I kind of got to the place where I think it's enjoyable to do that, but also you place a little bit too much pressure on yourself to get up and kind of get moving. So I have changed my routine around a little bit more. And when I wake up in the morning, I'll still do my gratitude and that stuff there, but there's always a bit of time in between when I finish that and when Noemi wakes up and when I like to make her a coffee. I don't like to do it while she's sleeping because the grind is quite loud.
Yeah.
But I'll just find myself like, that's my time in the morning where it's quiet and I can just watch ridiculous videos that no one, like my favorite videos, there's 3 videos that I love watching on YouTube at the moment. I love GeoGuessr. So watching GeoGuessr videos for me.
What's that?
It's a website, it's a game where it'll just drop you somewhere randomly in the world and you've got to figure out where you are. And there's people that are really, really good at it.
I've seen a dude that does this on
so
YouTube.
You know that, So I love watching that. There's a guy who I like watching his stuff where he's just splitting wood. He just reviews axes and stuff. Yeah, really satisfying. There's another one. I've never played Call of Duty in my life. I don't have any gaming things, but there's a game on Call of Duty called Prop Hunt. I don't know if you've heard anything. I've seen it. But basically, it's this game of Call of Duty where there's 2 teams. A team where they have guns and stuff, and they are trying to find the other team and kill them. But the other team, they are just random objects that you can be. So they might be like the table. And they hide around a map and they try, like, it's the most ridiculous thing. But just being able to sit there in the morning and watch videos like that, for some reason, it's just a great way to have that bit of, you know, like you said, that bit of me time in the morning, which is good. But I find ordinarily I'd be really embarrassed to kind of admit that they're the videos I enjoy watching. And like, that's what I do when I wake up in the morning. But I think that's, like you said, kind of leaning into your authentic self is such a good thing to be able to do, where it's nice to have those moments within your day.
Do you think the reason that that's so enticing to you is because so much of what's in your life professionally has an element of pressure to it, where you're trying to be brilliant and you are ambitious and you do have a real drive, but also a need to perform, because whether you perform or not is the predicator of whether you get more opportunity, that in your own personal time, being able to, I guess, lean into a little bit of silliness and just like meaningless content and just enjoy just being. Do you think that's why that's so enticing?
I think so. I've found that for me, forcing like brilliance or creativity is a really tough thing to be able to do. Sitting down and, like I mentioned before, like trying to write this book is difficult to make myself sit down and to try and write stuff and to be creative. All my best ideas come usually when I'm laying in bed, just staring at the ceiling or going for a walk or out there in the ocean when I'm not actually trying to find that. Like, I feel like that's when my brain tends to work the best. So if I was to, you know, almost kid myself and wake up in the morning and be like, now's the time to be brilliant, it's not going to work. So I think it is nice to have that other side of being where you don't have to be on all the time. There's no expectation for yourself. And it does take a certain level of being okay with that, because I'm sure there's some people where they're like, mate, how can you find some time to do that? Like, life is full on. And I appreciate that some people maybe don't have as much time during the day as what I do. And that's something that I'm fortunate to be able to have. I mean, it's not like I spend 5 hours sitting there watching these videos. It's literally like 15, 20 minutes before I go and make a coffee in the morning. But I think it is something that we all need. And like, everyone gets it in different ways, whether it's watching Netflix or scrolling through your phone, or some people might even just get it from like reading or playing piano. Like, there's so many different ways to do it. And again, no, it's probably going to be the title of this podcast, but everyone's different. So, you know, you've just got to find what works for you. And I think that's where being open and being authentic to yourself is where you can find that.
How much of that do you think is found in your experience, like trying to feel different things by, and maybe this is me just trying to control it again, like, find a new experience and do it, because maybe there is a bit of control freak in me, that it's like trying to force, because a lot of my creativity comes from leaning into a certain feeling. So it might be, for example, I wanted to write a little bit before you got here this morning, and I found that there was just like kind of almost really deep, almost like into a tone sad music allows me to lean into the feelings of sadness that might inspire thoughts around more happiness, or like the polar end of the spectrum. So it's like almost leaning into the duality of what I'm trying to experience. So if I want to be like, if I want to think about really funny thoughts, or I want to lean into like the stuff that is comical in my life, it helps to listen to comedians. And it's always in a duality with what I experience at the time. So I listen to more Theo Von than ever when I'm stressed and feel a bit like I'm in a monotonous cycle of work, because it's just, it allows me to feel the polar opposite. And when I feel like things are sometimes like just going really in flow and there's so much joy and freedom in my life, I like to listen to something that brings me to the other end to remind myself of how grateful I am for that joy and that freedom and that peace that I feel. Do you resonate with that at all?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't say it's something that I sort of do or benefit from too much, like as individually. But it does, I think it does make sense if you're like, at the end of the day, you're in control of your thoughts and how you're perceiving things. So you doing that is helping you enhance whatever feelings or emotions that you're doing. And that's probably your way of doing it. I haven't really experimented too much with that. I can definitely, what I'm either reading or listening to at that moment will have a huge influence on like what work I'm doing. So again, going back to writing, I've been trying to read as much as possible, and I'll finish a book. Like I was reading Sam Neill's book, and I was like, okay, I found myself almost writing a little bit like Sam Neill. It was strange. And I tend to be influenced a lot by what's in front of me like that, but I've never tried it on the opposite end of the spectrum to kind of balance that, or whether it's to draw it out or enhance it. I haven't really done too much of that, but it's an interesting thought. I'd be interested to know if anyone else kind of does that, but it's a really intentional way of trying to manage the way in which you're thinking things. Maybe you do control things a little bit more than you think.
Well, I think it's almost the reason why people watch so much reality TV, because it's like when they're like, husband and wife are sitting there on the lounge at night, they work their 9 to 5, they come home, they make their dinner at the same time, they sit there and have their cup of tea and a biscuit in front of the telly, and at 7:30 some chick's screaming because the guy in the villa chose someone else. It's like, it's almost the drama that doesn't exist in their life, and there's something enticing about, we're happy to experience it on TV so that our life feels more stable. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. Like it's probably experiencing the emotion without having the real life impacts of that. Yeah. You can experience sadness without having to experience, the loss of a loved one or something like that, which you would have to experience in order to get to that level. So I get where that's sort of coming from. I guess it depends how you use it. Right? If it's something that you're intentionally using for creativity, then by all means go for it. It's probably got some value there for you, but it's definitely interesting. I haven't really thought about it too much, to be honest.
I want to dive into another question with you for your consideration here. So I recently listened to a gent by the name of Brian Klaas. He was on Chris Williamson's podcast, and the whole episode was around chaos theory, and how chaos is this secret force that controls our life. And I was like enticed by the title. I was like, oh, that's really interesting, and like that's got me curious. I want to hear what this is about. And so I started listening to the episode, and I bloody loved it. And I was so convinced by what this fellow was saying that I went and got his audiobook, and I started listening to that. It's called Fluke. And essentially the whole premise of the book, well, I'm halfway through, but the premise that I'm getting so far is that we often say in life, when something challenging or something that we define as bad happens, we say, oh, everything happens for a reason. But he contests this. He says, nothing happens for a reason, but everything that happens matters. And so something that can be seemingly insignificant in the history and the order of the world can change the trajectory of life forever. And he shares a couple of incredible examples of this in his book. The first real example of this that he shares is the story of the former Secretary of Defense for the US, who 4 years before World War II broke out, was on a holiday with his wife in Kyoto, Japan. They, from the moment they got off the steam train, absolutely fell in love with this place and the city, and they had all of these rich memories and experiences from their holiday there together, and they come back and often reminisced on how much of a great time they had together in Kyoto. And then the atomic bomb has been created by Oppenheimer. We're in the midst of World War II, and he gets a memo to say that they're going to drop the first atomic bomb on Kyoto. And immediately all of this feeling of, potential regret and, oh my God, we're about to drop a bomb on the place that we love so much and it's sentimental to us. And so he rushes into action and basically calls off the strike on Kyoto and has the target changed to, I think it was Osaka and Hiroshima, if I'm remembering that correctly. And so hundreds of thousands of people in another city died and hundreds of thousands of lives in Kyoto were saved because of what history would define in loose terms as an insignificant holiday, a romantic holiday of one couple. And so the order of the world and the order of history can change forever based off seemingly insignificant events. He shared another example, which is a really fun example to share, about this. I think it was a catfish or a crawfish, sorry. Completely different, but a crawfish. It was a fish. Let's just be loose with it.
What is a crawfish?
I've got no idea. I'm not even trying to understand. It feels like such an American thing.
Yeah. It's like a bear claw. It's a pastry or something like that.
So it was in a German aquarium in 1995 that out of random chance and random event, a contingent event, this crawfish creates or develops a mutation in its genes, which allows it to reproduce within itself. It doesn't need a mate. It can reproduce within itself. It had both male and female organs at the same time and was able to reproduce babies that all carried the same mutation of gene. And so this crawfish starts to develop and produce at crazy rates, and so the population of them in this German aquarium starts to grow. And over in Madagascar, they were struggling from two challenges at the time. The main challenge being a malnourishment of the population because they had they didn't have a steady supply of a consistent protein source. And so they took this crawfish that had the mutation and dropped it into the Madagascar, which allowed them to hugely populate and feed the people. But also, another random chance event, this crawfish just seemed to love feeding on one of the parasites that were killing a lot of children because they were polluting the drinking water. And so this weird genetic mutation that happened in a random German aquarium in 1995 changed lives across the whole population of Madagascar because it provided a source of protein and saved kids from this parasite. It's all these random things that happen. And I asked myself the question in the shower, what is a seemingly insignificant event in my life that changed the course of history? And starting to think about this, and what wouldn't be defined as seemingly insignificant in the order of the world is the bubonic plague. But the bubonic plague had a bigger effect on my life than what people may realise or consider. I'm going to share this with you, so this is interesting. So back when the plague swept through Europe, lots and lots of the population passed. This plague was devastating. It was the worst pandemic they'd ever experienced, and it took the lives of many. There was a population of people, though, that seemed to, in proportion to others, survive and not even be fazed by the plague. And this population of people had a mutation in their genes that was defective. And because of this defective mutation in their genes, it changed the way that their body took on hydration and water and actually made them more immune to the plague and allowed them to survive it even when they maybe contracted it. And that genetic mutation was the CFTR genetic mutation that causes CF in people like myself. And so a couple months ago, I'm at the doctor's, and Soph and I are starting to explore genetic testing for our future children, our hypothetical children who, where the dad was CF and a mum who needs to be tested to see if she's a carrier of the CF gene, may be plagued by this in the way that they could potentially have CF or just be a carrier of the gene. We started to dive into that research. And my doctor asked me a question. She said, Brad, do you know why CF is the most common genetic illness in Caucasian people? I said, no, I don't. And she said, because when the plague swept through Europe, people who had the CFTR defective gene seemed to survive the plague more than the regular population, which meant that the surviving people from the plague, who then reproduced and had children, passed on this gene, and it's why 4 to 5% of people have the CFTR gene who are Caucasian. Basically, there is I don't know of a person of African descent who has cystic fibrosis. It's very rare in the Asian community. It's literally just Caucasian people who seem to be challenged by cystic fibrosis.
Wow.
And I thought, isn't that funny that the reason I have CF is likely because of the plague, but the reason that I'm here and my ancestors survived the plague is because of cystic fibrosis.
That's a wild duality, isn't it?
Crazy duality. So I wonder, in reflection, and I'm putting you majorly on the spot here, is there a seemingly insignificant event in your life, or an event that has just led to a chain of events that make up the reality that you experience now?
There's none that I can immediately think of that's going to be great listening for a podcast and me just going for the next 16 minutes. I could definitely guess that there would be something around policy to do with sharks that would have impacted me in my life and what I do today, and the fact that, again, great listening for other people. There's one of those, there's probably two, it probably doesn't have the same amount of backstory as what yours does, but I think my experience of the shark attack could be the initial event that causes, hopefully, the survival of other people. Due to the result of my attack, Surfing Australia has invested heavily into having shark trauma kits, basically, within every board riders club, which are the clubs that people that surf show up and surf competitions against each other. There's also people within that are trained on how to tie tourniquets and things like that. And that was as a result of my attack. So potentially there could be someone, if you ask someone down the track, who is saved because someone within their board riders club essentially knew how to tie a tourniquet. That could be because of me. The other one of those is, you've heard the part of my story how there were 2 separate helicopters that were sent to pick me up because of the miscommunication. First one went to the wrong beach. Second one came and picked me up and had blood on board, which the first one did not. As a result of that, I believe it's now mandatory that all the helicopters must have blood on board at all times.
That's cool.
That's what I've been told as far as that goes. I actually haven't looked into if that is something that they end up following through on or not. But again, that could save someone's life. So potentially my experience could be, that starting point could be the bubonic plague for other shark survivors. But yeah, it is. I think it's such an interesting thing to look at those experiences, and it's fascinating that you can actually draw yours back so far in time, because often those questions of looking at an event and looking at something that may have caused it or may have saved someone, or those signs that you see, it's a lot of it's just humans looking for answers. It's like one of the most common questions that I get asked is like, did you know anything would be different about the day that you got attacked? And what I've come, like the position that I've come to kind of stand on is that it's easy to look back in hindsight and to try and find something that stands out, or a reason or a sign that you maybe shouldn't have gone surfing that day. And if I look hard enough, absolutely I can find them. Right? The fact that the shop that I was working in got broken into that morning, maybe it was a sign, an omen that it was going to be a bad day. Right? There's so many things that you can look at there. Like there's all the forks in the road as far as deciding to go for a surf that afternoon, who I called to go for a surf, who showed up. And it's so easy to try and find answers in all of those, but I think answers is just humans looking for meaning. And where that links to, I suppose, a bit of a greater meaning is like what you can actually take from the experience. Because I get asked a lot about if I have any sort of faith or religious beliefs that were confirmed or shaped by my experience. And I wasn't someone that grew up religious. And I have a lot of people that are like, oh, did you feel any benefit come from, people praying for you or anything like that? And I say, I don't, because I didn't grow up with any sort of faith. However, one thing I have learned a lot is to be a lot more open-minded to what people gain from that. And one thing I do love about religion is it does bring people together, and it gives you a feeling of, it gives you an answer to a lot of the things that happen in the world. And I think the ability to grasp onto that can give you hope. And whether you get that from religion, whether you get it from beliefs, or whether you get it from facts, or whatever it might be, I think hope is something you need as humans, no matter what it is that you're dealing with or whatever it is that you go through. Like, I'm sure your experience of looking back on the bubonic plague and having an answer for that, it's interesting, and it maybe gives you a few answers that you didn't have before. Whether it helps you or not, that doesn't really matter, but it does answer a very important question for you as a human being, which is the why.
And I think it gives a sense of comfort as a human being that no matter how bad things can seem to be, you never know what is downstream from it. Because like you said, we're always presented with these forks in the road. And even the conscious decision to turn right instead of left, whilst it may lead to great fortune or great hardship, these contingent events, be it random fluke events that we have absolutely no control over, can completely change the trajectory of everything. And if you think about existence and life as this interconnected web of everyone on their own individual journeys, with all of these both convergent events being things that they plan for and move through life that don't necessarily affect the future, but do, because everything does, and all of these things that are completely out of control that can affect absolutely every ounce of population around them. It's crazy. It's like there is, I think for some people that feels like an existential thought, like I'm so out of control. But there's also a freedom in that. Like, don't be so harsh on the conditions of your current reality, because they can change tomorrow. Like, we're future makers. We're shaping the future with absolutely every decision we make and every decision we don't. That's the other thing. I was talking to my mum about this on the phone this morning. There is and I've heard Chris Will talk about this a lot, and actually Jordan Peterson for that fact too, that we sometimes fool ourselves to think that not making a decision means that nothing happens. No, that's a decision. Yeah. And there's certainly still consequences. So I guess you have to decide as an individual, what decisions do I want to make? What things am I going to try and rig in my favor? And so it's getting conscious with that, and just understanding that we don't have a lot of control over most things. So you just got to take it as it comes. And that's so hard.
It's definitely hard as a human to surrender control, especially when so much of, I think there's a lot of self-help out there that talks about controlling what you can. And I think there's a lot of value in that, as far as, the things that you can control, which is, your ability to think about the situation that's in front of you, how you want to respond to it, and things that you do in order to either overcome something or strive for something, whatever that might be. But I think when it comes to that control, it's also a little bit devastating to know that you can try and put as many things in control as possible, but it might seem like the universe conspires against you and things don't work out. And if you believe so much in control and things don't work out, then what are you left with? I think you need the ability to know that, you can control the things that you want, and that's going to help you move in the right direction. But there is an element of chaos and randomness to a lot of the things that we do. And a lot of it's about understanding that. And I guess that is why this is quite it's quite a deep thing to talk about. that I think a lot of people probably wouldn't be too comfortable talking about is, as you said, knowing that there's probably a lot of your life that's out of your control, that is, you know, subject to complete randomness. But it is, like, I mean, you and I are both people that are subject to that randomness lottery and have come up with things against us. But on the flip side, we've also had things that are incredibly lucky. Like you were able to live on because of that genetic mutation that helped you avoid the bubonic plague. And like I've spoken about all the luck that I've received as well. And you can't have one without the other.
It's a duality.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really, really difficult to overcome as a human in the way in which we think and want to control things. But it's just part of who we are. And I think sometimes, again, maybe that innocence in knowing that, you know, sometimes it is better to just take a step back and maybe not know as much as what we always try and understand can at times be beneficial.
Is there anything that scares you at the moment about your reality or things that are on the horizon?
Yeah, I've done a lot of thinking about death lately, partly because of the Inside episode that I was on, and the idea of death. Like, I got asked if death scares me, and I said, yes, it terrifies me, but not for me as an individual. Like, I've dealt with my mortality through my experience. I know what it's like to kind of stand there and wonder if that's it. And that's not terrifying for me as much as it is to knowing that I might lose people that I care about. And it's a selfish way of looking at it. Like, I understand that. Like, it's something that you kind of almost passing the buck onto someone else and saying, like, you deal with it. But I'm terrified of losing people that I love. Like, that is a massive fear for me. And it's something that, again, is so out of my control. Like, I can't control, you know, there's the randomness element. Like, say, for example, the randomness element of getting into the car and something bad might happen on your way to work. Like, I can't control when Noemi leaves the house in the morning and, you know, the odds that she steps into there and the lottery that something may or may not happen. And if something did, I would be devastated. Like, it would easily be the worst day of my life. And it sucks that I can't control that. And I think there's quite a lot of fear in that for me. And I think it is something that's quite relevant at the moment because it's been a discussion that I've had quite a lot lately around death and what it means, because I think a lot of people look to me for understanding on death. And I'm someone who's been close to death, and I think that is something that I've been able to navigate fairly well, and I've understood quite a lot about myself and what that means for my life. But I haven't looked at it from the other side yet, or I haven't experienced it from the other side. I've only looked at it there and known, you know, that's something that I don't want to experience.
Do you think that your fear around losing the people you love has been almost elevated by your own experiences? Because there is a naivety before you experience any hardship yourself that you think life is always going to be okay. You're on the merry-go-round. Yeah,
I think there's probably part of that. Like, yeah, if you haven't had that experience, you don't really know what bad feels like. I also think part of it comes from knowing how my experience has impacted other people. Like, the amount of people that I talk to that can tell me exactly where they were and how they felt when they got the news that I'd been attacked by a shark, like that for me is something that leaves such an impact on, like, that's my relationship with that person. That's how they think of me, is like when they hear my name, they can cast back to that moment. And it's a devastating moment, I think, again, because that's one of my big fears, is knowing that I've been that moment for other people. And again, it is 100% a selfish way of looking at it, because, like, who am I to say that that's the worst moment in that person's life, because it would be for mine. But it's something that, because I know of the sheer amount of people that have received that phone call or heard the news or logged on to Instagram and Facebook and seen that pop up, and because that's my fear, that's how I see it for other people as well. But again, I think there is probably part of it where when you do go through, after having, you know, a life where there's minimal setbacks and minimal things to deal with, and then you're confronted with this really big thing which reminds you, doesn't remind you, kind of just hits you like a ton of bricks that life is short and fragile, and it's not always as simple and as easy as it was when you were growing up. I think that does make you realize how, just the impact that those small moments can make, those small chances, like the odds that you play every single day. And it is something that, as much as I kind of talk about it and I try and reason with it for myself, I don't know if I'll find any solace or answers in knowing how I feel about it or how someone else might feel about it as well, because when you do arrive at that moment, how you respond might be completely different.
Yeah. As we said, contingent events, so much outside of our control. You never know until you're there. Never know until you're experiencing it. I feel like I share a similar sentiment to you, that I was recently on a podcast, and the host, she asked me if I'm scared of death and what I think about the afterlife. It's like, I'm just scared of not getting the time with the people I love. Like, I want more of that experience. I want to enjoy more of what I know feels super good and super right. My fear at the moment is probably just, the thing I'm grappling with is, how old are you, Bretto?
31.
31.
I had to think about that for a second. I was like, that's the hardest question you've asked.
Well, it's funny because a lot of my mates are I've got mates at different ages, but like between me at 28 and 31, Ferns and Joey are both around that age too. And one of the things that I think about quite a lot is, whilst there is certainly different paths that we all take in life, and we do life on our own timelines, and I'm a big believer of designing your own life to fit the kind of experience that you want to have, there are certain things that over the course of the next 5 years, and maybe even the next 10 if you stretch it, but certainly the next 5 years, that the way I think, that you need to kind of start to get some sort of grip with it. Otherwise it feels like it's getting a little bit out of reach. And so because we have to do IVF, are thinking more and more about when we want to start a family. Because until you have your first child in your arms and know that you're going to get to experience fatherhood for me, or motherhood for Soph, and a family, there is this uncertainty of like, well, how long will it take for us to fall pregnant?
Yeah.
And certainly I've heard plenty of stories of friends and connections and other people who talk about IVF and how that's been challenging for them. And I think about also at the same tone though, that like right now we have a freedom that we have nobody that is responsible to us. We're responsible for no children. So we have a freedom in the way that we want to go and adventure and experience the world. And I feel like we're on there's a bit of a ticking time bomb in the background of like, how long do we have to fully be free of responsibility before our life changes forever? And not to say that's a bad thing, because that excites me more than anything.
Yeah.
But
again,
how long?
That's like there was getting married and then there's having a family
For sure.
You're level with each other, really.
It's so up there.
Yeah.
But I'm mindful of the fact that you need a stability when you have kids. It's important for them. And whilst, you can still go on holidays and have adventures, like I think about what happens if in 5 years the podcast blew up, and these are all what ifs, right? And these existential questions we ask ourselves, but like, what if a great opportunity fell into my lap? Would I have the courage to take it? Do I have the courage to lean into that stuff now? Do we have the courage to go and live on the other side of the world for 3 months and just experience what may come of it? There's all these questions that I think I'm asking myself at this stage of life because it feels timely. Do you feel any of that?
Yeah, and I think a big part of it, like you said, you look around at a lot of your friends who are at that age where societally, like you're supposed to do certain things, whether it is raise a family or settle down, whatever it might be. And it can be really difficult to feel like you're okay, whether you're settling into that norm or whether you are pushing against it. Like, again, that's an individual decision that everyone has to make. But there's definitely a big part of life, I think, where you are going to have to make those big decisions, no matter whether that's if you're 35 and you have a kid and you might need to move to the other side of the world, or whether you are much younger and you're being presented with a completely different opportunity, as opposed to like if you retire and you want to go and move somewhere or do something or help your kids raise a family. Like I think life is going to present you with those big decisions that you have to make time and time again. And at the end of the day, if you're doing things for the right reasons, that's really all that matters. And that's where I think, say you had a young family and, you know, the podcast gives you an opportunity to maybe move to the other side of the world and do things. I'm sure you find an answer where you can be okay with whatever sacrifice that you have to make with the family, but also the ability to chase the dream that you have of having one of the biggest podcasts in the world or the best podcast in the world and doing things that you love to do there. I think that's where the ability to ask yourself a question quite regularly of the things that you're doing today, what is the reason that you're doing them for? And that kind of leans into that purpose piece, which I think is kind of, we talked about trends in like speaking and popular culture. Like I think the purpose piece has kind of been rolled over for a little while. Like people, it was really big, and then people started to poke holes in it, and then people moved on to other things. I think purpose is something that is always going to be a constant, because that is the question of like, why are you doing what you're doing? And that's where I think for someone like yourself who has a really good handle on what you want in life, finding the answers to those questions isn't going to be tough. It's just a matter of when you're going to have to make those decisions. And I think that it'll be a defining moment, because you'll be able to look at it and be happy regardless of the answer that you chose, that you did it for the right reason. Like the outcome doesn't really matter at that stage. Like if you know you're doing things for the reason that matters the most to you and, again, the people around you.
Yeah, it's leaning into the right experiences, or at least what feels right.
Yeah.
Is there anything that societally, I should say, it's a tough word, isn't it? Would be considered a norm that you feel like you and Noemi in your lives are challenging?
It's actually, I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about the differences between like when you do get married in Australia as opposed to where Noemi's from in Quebec. So marriage isn't as big a thing over there as what it is in Australia. So
why do you think that is?
I think history and religion just play a really big part in it. I think that's probably the best answer that I have for that. But it's honestly just a cultural thing. It's the same, answer to the question of like, why do people eat dinner here at 5:30 as opposed to 10 o'clock elsewhere? Like I think it's just a cultural thing that's normal that people do. And I remember when I proposed to Noemi, we had the conversation around like, getting married and how different it would be. Like her siblings aren't married. One of them's engaged, but the others, it's not necessarily normal to get married over there. And there's like the novelty in that experience for her siblings. They're like, oh my God, our younger sister got married. Like that's such a different thing to what we're used to. So I'd say like there'd be a lot of different answers to the question that you asked around, living a certain life or having kids or whatever that might be. But I think the one around getting married is an interesting one just because it is so different in cultures. It's not necessarily the difference between what you and I believe in our current culture, but just knowing that each culture can look at things differently, and you might think that something's completely normal here, but over there they're like, wow, you did what? And that's what I think is really interesting about a lot of the experiences that we choose, is that like you can make a decision or decide to do something you think is completely normal, but it might be completely left of field for someone else. And that's what I think makes life quite beautiful. There's no defined way to do it in any way. There are probably certain parameters on how to do certain things. Like if you're looking to have kids, for example, like there's only some, there's a certain amount of time that you can have to do that, but that doesn't mean that you have to, fit into the typical norm that a lot of people would expect, over here, get married by 25, have kids by 30, settle into your mortgage, and then the next 30 years will breeze by like that. That's perfectly fine for a lot of people. And I enjoy people that had that sort of, like, I really appreciate people that had that sort of stability in their life. But everyone's going to do things differently. I think you just have to be open-minded to everyone's decisions and know that because someone isn't doing something isn't because there's something wrong with them.
Yeah, it's such an individual thing, and there is a part of me that's always struggled with the idea of just being okay with rocking up to a job every day. Like there is a part of my being internally that fights it, and maybe it's because I haven't found a way to make the things that I'm really passionate about more consistent yet. Like I think I was saying this to someone the other day. If I was walking into the studio to record a chat every day or stepping on stage every day to perform a keynote, there'd probably be a lot of joy in that. And maybe it's just trying to get a little bit closer to the sun, you know, the thing that makes me feel good and fires me up. And maybe more consistently I could do that. But I see some people who love that stability. There's some people who just love knowing that from 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, they're at work and they can manage their stress and they know what they've got to do and their role's defined. Like we're all so different.
Yeah.
And that's part of the joy of life.
It is.
If we're all the same, we'd be robots.
Exactly. And I remember you saying this, it might have even been in the last podcast that we do. Like if you're looking at someone else and you say you want their life, then you have to take absolutely everything that comes along with it. Like if someone looks at me and they're like, oh, I'd love to be able to get up on stage and speak, and like it looks like you have a great time doing what you do. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. There's quite a lot of anxiety that comes along with the times when you're not getting bookings.
Yeah.
Like it's difficult to forecast too far in the future when you only ever have work that's 3 to 4 months out from now. So, and I get that. I look at other people, I look at other speakers where I'm like, I'd love to have as much work as what they've got now. But then you're like, do you want to be on the plane every second day? Like, do you want to be away from your family? Like this, you've got to give up something to do whatever it is that you want. And I think that's something that's really easy to overlook when you're looking at other people's lives and what they have. Like you need to take on absolutely everything.
Do you think there's anyone that you've been able to meet? Because one of the great things about speaking and being in the worlds that we've been in where you do media and you get to meet new people is you really do get an insight into other people's lives and you get the chance to chat and hear about what their experience has been like, because there's a vulnerability to it and a real connection to it. Is there anyone that you met that you previously just knew from a persona perspective, like you'd seen them online, you'd watched their work and you thought, oh, their life is amazing, and then you met them and they told you their story and you've seen the other side of it and thought, okay, maybe that isn't for me?
Yeah, like I think I have these experiences all the time. Like again, we're lucky to meet a lot of people that have amazing lives and amazing stories and do some incredible things. And there's always the dark side to that you don't see from the outside. But I think the one that resonates the most to me is probably, it's a person that everyone would run into most days. That's like the local cafe owner. Right? You see someone at the cafe, they're always pretty happy in the morning, they're meeting people, they seem happy enough. But when you actually talk to them about how difficult it is to run a cafe, raise a family and all the competition that's in, like, I look at those sorts of people and I'm like, you are incredibly resilient to be able to wake up every single morning at that time and do the same thing. I admire someone who can step into an industry like that because they genuinely love doing what they do, despite all the stress that comes along with it. Like despite all of the anxiety that comes along with running a small business in a small town. Like I see it. You can walk into almost any cafe, and sure, there are some cafes that are a lot more successful than others, but I think it's just a story that is it's always out there. And it's probably not the answer that you were expecting as far as a specific individual that I could point to and say that, but they're the people that I look to and I actually get a lot of inspiration from, because I think those are the type of stories that I just enjoy. Like the big stories are great, but I think the little everyday stories of, the battlers that you hear out there that, you might not see the big struggle that they're going through, but you kind of know what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. That for me is what inspires me.
I think the truth to it is that we all experience the same feelings, just in different conditions.
Yeah.
I think about, you just spoke about the uncertainty and the anxiety that you feel as a speaker when you're not getting any bookings. And, it'd be the same for the athlete who is coming up to contract renewal but isn't playing their best footy or isn't, running their best races or, you know, the person who just doesn't feel like they're writing their book or their music, and it just doesn't feel like anything's coming to the surface at the moment, and their label's putting pressure on them to do something. Or the person who's sitting in their office at work and there's like a yearning to do something different, but there's nothing else on the horizon and they need to pay the bills. Like, we all experience that same feeling in different conditions. And it's remembering that regardless of the conditions, that feeling is something that you're going to have to grapple with. So it's, you know, Frank Grief, who was recently on the podcast, I asked him how much about life actually changes when you sell a business for $180 million. And he went from, you know, a 10-year business where for the first half of it, he earned $400 a week so that he could afford to pay employees. Second half, he earned $700 a week, to then him and his two brothers sell for $180 million without any other shareholders. It's a massive change of life.
Yeah.
But he's like, the dopamine resets after a short period of time, and you still feel feelings. Like, you still feel sad, you still feel happy, you still feel anxious or frustrated or challenged. It's just in different conditions. And it's almost like success in that sense is so transient, and money like comes and goes, that there's actually not much that changes. And that's almost a hard pill to swallow for people, because there's a thought or feeling, yeah, well, what's the point of it then? And like, oh, surely like their life's better because they've got a lot of money. Like, certainly some needs are met financially, and that's what he said. He's like, I'm not going to say that the money doesn't help. It certainly means that I don't have to stress about the inflation of coffee prices.
Yeah.
He's like, I'm not stressed that my coffee's $6 now and it used to be $5, but you still have to like get your kids to school on time. And when the groceries aren't in the house, you don't get to magically make them appear. You still like, we still have these same life problems. And that's actually comforting.
Yeah.
It's comforting to hear.
I think so. But I think it also, it points to what we spoke about earlier. Like, if you can achieve something like what Frank has achieved, and to be able to sell a business and exit for such a huge sum of money, it will change your life. But again, that's the importance of taking a step back and appreciating the goal that you've just achieved. Like, for him to just move on to the next thing without acknowledging what he's done would be like, that's the fool's errand of just completely chasing your tail over and over and over again. And I think the ability to know that, as you said, the dopamine resets, like, everyone kind of, after you achieve something, no matter how big or small it is, we're all still the same flesh and bones, right? Like, you have the same choice after that to then say, well, now what do I do?
Well, I love that one of the key messages from that whole episode for me was he spoke about how the companionship of being able to experience that with his brothers, and the camaraderie of the early days when they're in the warehouse and they got their shirts off because they're sweating and they can't afford AC, and they're packing boxes and putting orders out. And he's like, they're the stories and that camaraderie that made it so worthwhile. And I think it's like a reminder to enjoy the experience of life, like we said, with people, and to share those experiences and make those memories and not lose track of, I think I'm reshaping the way I think about my dreams and goals to not be destinations, but just to be guides, like to guide me in a direction in which I get to embrace the experience.
So you're taking the Miley Cyrus route.
It's the climb.
Well, I think that it's so valid, which is why it's one of the bigger cliches that you hear, right?
Huge cliche. And the hard thing is, when you're in it, you hate to hear it.
You do, for sure.
Because you're like, I want to feel like the end destination is going to give me something I don't already have.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely valid. Something I've been leaning into a little bit more, especially with speaking. I've been through, different circuitous routes as to like what you speak about, and you come back to certain things and you talk about other things, and it always changes. But one thing that I've kind of come back to is it's more just about opportunity for a lot of people. Like there's something new that I'm doing, which is called Just a Thought. So I think our thoughts are one of the most powerful things that we can have. And the reason for that is because they can be simple, they can be innocent, but they can also be incredibly powerful. Like every single amazing thing in this world was started with someone saying just a thought, but. And I think there's so much to be said for leaning into your thoughts, because they teach you a lot about what you want. And if you can have a thought and then the ability to either vocalize that or make it real, that gives you the opportunity. What you do after that is entirely up to you. But as long as that thought doesn't stay in your head, then that's where you start to get rid of, the regrets that you want to try and minimize in life. I always have talked about achievement as just being a byproduct of a desire to avoid regret. Because achievement doesn't really matter. Like achievement failure is the same thing. But as long as you can live a life knowing that you've been true to yourself and done the things that you care about, that's what means a lot to me. And I think it all just starts with the thoughts that you have. So I think it's really important to get people to be, and like vulnerability plays a big part of it. There's learning to actually listen to your thoughts and then what you do with them. And everyone's different. And I think that's where it would be great to be able to tell people about specifically how you set goals, how you can define purpose and values and meaning in your life. But everyone's at different stages. Like I can speak to an audience where on the right, there might be someone who's going through the most difficult period of your life. But on the left, there might be someone who has dreams and aspirations and hopes. And they're two people they might be completely different people that you would guide through that experience based on what they're going through. But I think the thought is the common denominator for both of those people. For the person going through the struggle, the thought is, do I want to be defined by this? How can I bounce back? How can I work my way through this? Whereas the person with the goals, the thought is like, what are my values? What do I want to live by? What's meaningful to me? How can I put something in place in order to live a life that's meaningful? And they both start with the thought. And I think it's important to acknowledge that everyone, again, the title of the podcast is going to be Everyone's Different. But that's been something that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately as to what can people actually take away from all these experiences. And I think the ability to lean into your thoughts, to listen to them and then to act on them is incredibly powerful.
Okay, let's riff on this a bit here then. What's a thought that you've been having that you haven't expressed yet and lent into?
I think there's one that I've always been a little bit, I don't really know what the word is, like coy is probably a word that you could use to describe the way in which I describe my job and my career. There's something that comes along with the idea of being a, in quotes, motivational speaker that has connotations attached to it. And I've always been almost embarrassed when people ask me what I do for work to say straight out like I'm a motivational speaker. And the thought there is, I guess it's the thought of judgment. Like, what are people going to think about me? Like, that's often an introduction, like when you're meeting someone. But it's a career that I'm incredibly proud of. Like, what I'm able to do when I stand up on stage, which is something that I've had to overcome a ton of hurdles in order to be able to do, is something I am genuinely one of the most proud of in anything in my life. So the thought for me is, how can I lean more into that? Like, how can I show people that this is something that I'm truly proud of, regardless of what they think about it? Because there'll always be someone that's like, oh, you're just a snake oil salesman. Like, it's, and there's always going to be those connotations to it. But that's where if I can find a way to be authentic with how I get across how proud I am of the job that I am lucky enough to be able to do, then I think that's something that would massively change. I think it would actually change the way in which people perceive the job as well. And it would be a massive thing, but that's something that I haven't really lent in. I haven't found a way to lean into it yet, would be the answer.
Have you ever had a negative experience where somebody has challenged you being a motivational speaker, quote unquote, or is this just purely something you've built up in your head?
Purely something I built up in my head, because I look at some other people who are speakers where I'm probably my own worst enemy. Like, I look at other people where I kind of in a way question, And it's the wrong thing to do, because like I'm not in their position, but you almost question their authority to be talking about certain things. And it's the wrong thing to do because I don't know what they're like. I haven't lived their life, as we were saying before. But it's a connotation I 100% put onto myself. And it's probably one that came because that's probably the way in which I looked at things before the attack and before I fell into this line of work. Like, this isn't something that I chose to do, really. Like, I didn't wake up one day and be like, I want to be a speaker. Like, this all happened by accident for me. It's just, I, in a way, was lucky enough to have a story that people find interesting. And when I started sharing that, it had an impact on people. And that impact is something that drove me to want to do it more. It's not because I had the ego of wanting to stand on the biggest stage, but it's because I know what it's like to receive that one text message after you've spoken to a group of school kids, for example, of someone saying, oh, I've really been struggling with my confidence, and you talking about how you were able to overcome that has helped me a lot. And that's what it's been about for me. And I think that's where overcoming those doubts that I place on myself about what it means to call myself a motivational speaker, like, I shouldn't care what people think about that, because I know what it's like I've had those messages knowing that I've been able to help someone, and that's what means the most to me.
I think it's a product of, because I feel exactly what you're saying, not so much surrounding I don't know if shame's the word that you would say, but just the questioning of whether to identify as a speaker and to tell people that. Not so much that, but this thought of, we spoke about it before, like, am I a phony for changing the way I feel about a certain topic because once upon a time somebody paid me to express that thought and belief on stage? And as we said before, like, we're evolving as human beings. When did we ever stop evolving or learning new things? And I think a part of the cycle of learning about life is the more you know, the more you realize you don't.
Yeah.
And so when you realize how much is still yet to be understood, how much you still are yet to learn, you realize, oh, maybe everything I've ever thought and believed comes into question. Yeah. And I think that's just a part of the evolution. And so I almost think it's why I have this love-hate relationship with self-help, because there have been times in my life where I've read a self-help book or listened to a self-help style podcast, and just something that's been said has resonated with me so much and had a profound impact on the way that I then go on and live my life there from that moment with that new knowledge or new feeling. But then there's times where that thing comes into question again, because there is a changing dynamic of life. And so I think self-help is almost, the way I see it now, is it's a thesis. Yeah. Like, it's something to be questioned and to be tried, but it doesn't mean that it'll be tried, tested, and confirmed true for everyone.
Yes.
It's like, it's so different. Like, I have so many mates who are so different to me that the way that I experience one feeling or thought or belief can be completely different to them. And like, we can be at arms with each other, like, no, I see it a different way, and that's fine. I think that's healthy and normal. But as you said, when there's evidence to suggest that you feel differently about things, and there are going to be people who feel the same way that you do, and people who don't. And we experience, the best thing about speaking is some of those thoughts and feelings are validated immediately, because you can see people in the crowd who resonate, or they'll come up to you after and they'll say, that moved me. And you're like, okay, so that thing that I'm testing out and trialing seems to make sense to other people. And there's times where you can just see it doesn't. Yeah. Doesn't click with people. And there's times where people say something that I say and I go, I don't feel that. Yeah. It's different. But that's healthy.
It is definitely healthy. And it just goes back to being open-minded and being willing to listen. And all you can really do is to pass that with your own experience and your own beliefs and figure out what matters to you out of what someone else is saying. Like, you'll find that anywhere you look, really. And that's where I guess the increasing tribalism of this day and age, whether it be through politics or different beliefs, makes it harder for people to have that open-mindedness. But when it comes to what we're talking about, which is, motivation and self-help, there's probably a little bit less tribalism, so there's less meaning for someone to like vehemently disagree with what you're saying, but there's always going to be the opportunity for that.
Yeah, politics is probably the clearest example of where there is such a polarity and there's sometimes not even an attempt in politics to try and understand each other. It's purely like there's absolutely no empathy in politics.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like both sides are just, I'm like, how do you guys never see eye to eye on anything?
Yeah.
Like if Labor likes McDonald's, then Liberals like, no, we're KFC.
We're out, yeah.
We're KFC all the way.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, can't we just agree on some things?
Well, I was listening to a podcast on the way up that was talking about different styles of philosophy and how there was like with Socratic dialogue basically, which is just overwhelming someone with information to the point where they'll either get confused, say something wrong, or contradict themselves, was seen as a really effective way of like winning a debate. But because someone contradicts themselves because of how someone debates, which is politics and how they go back and forth, doesn't mean that what that person said is true or not. Like there's a difference between the ability to talk and debate and speak and the ability to find and recite facts. And I think that's where there's a huge disconnect when you look at something like politics, where I think a lot of people will just see the result of what's in front of them and be like, they lost the debate, they must be wrong. And whatever you define as winning or losing a debate can be completely influenced by what your point of view is anyway. So again, like I find the conversation around politics it's interesting, but it's also quite confusing and kind of a little bit pointless as well, because there's very little progress being made for the amount of energy that we spend on these topics.
Yeah. It's so true. Who do you think, is there someone that you can identify that has no interest in politics that you think would be a great Prime Minister?
So the great example that was in this podcast I was listening to before that was saying philosophers should be leading countries because they have no interest in leading it. And I think that's where my disillusionment with politics in general is I don't think we have the most inspirational people that are up there as candidates anywhere really throughout the world. And the reason for that is because they have no interest in all the bullshit that goes with running a country. There's a really good example of if you were on a sailing ship and you were looking for the best person to run the sailing ship, basically to sail you, get you from A to B, like who do you choose? Who do you personally think is the best person? Is it going to be the person that can rally everyone to work together? Or is it the person who is great at navigation, who spends all their time writing down the stuff in the books, looks at the stars and knows exactly where they're going? Like who's better off for you?
Such a good question. I think probably the person who rallies the troops, because the random events of life and the randomness of the ocean means that the guy who can navigate the course isn't always going to be able to take it, and maybe he folds under pressure. I don't know. But then it's the task of politics is always, it's such a shit job.
Terrible.
Imagine being the Prime Minister or the President of a country, how awful it would be. Oh. Like, yes, there is such a huge sense of responsibility, and there is, I think, and should be a huge sense of pride in being able to be the person who is the leader of a country. But because of all the bullshit that comes with it, for the life of me, I cannot understand Trump. This guy who has been, and I'm not even talking politically, I mean like the motivation, this guy who has had a lot of success in his life financially, has family, has all these things going. Man, why on earth would you want the stress of presidency?
Dopamine reset, he's just going for the next thing.
I'm like, I can't understand it.
No, I can't either.
But that's part of the problem is, and it comes back to that purpose thing, right? Like if you identify your purpose as serving other people and doing something for the good of others, even when you don't want to be the leader and someone encourages you into that role, then maybe that's the right person for the job. But it's very hard to get that kind of person to go through the rigmarole of a campaign.
Nearly impossible.
And the attacks. Yeah. Because that's part of it. Like you get the good person. And I'm sure there's probably examples of this. I'm not very politically informed on the history of politics. But I'm sure there would be examples of people who have been encouraged into that role and they've run to be president or prime minister of a country, and just after the political attacks and the people who question your character and try to tear you and your family down have just gone, fuck me, man, like I didn't want to do this in the first place, I'm out.
Yeah, and that's why you don't get those type of people in those positions. I'm sure it would happen everywhere. But that's like going back to navigating the ship. Like there's this very strong argument to be said that the person who is an expert in navigation is going to be the person that's going to technically be able to get the boat from A to B in the best and safest way possible. But they have no interest in dealing with all the other stuff. That's why the other person who doesn't have any idea about navigation and how to do all of that, that's where they need to get those people on board in order to help them. That's where they step in, although they're probably not the best person that's suited for the job going by their qualifications. It's such a tough thing to look at though. Like I as you said, whoever, we don't really get the right people in those positions because the incentives aren't there, but there's just too much stuff for them to deal with.
Do you think that maybe, so I'm thinking about politics, right? And particularly like the US comes to mind because they're in the midst of, they're getting close to the election and, all the campaigning and all the noise and all the media around it. And I guess there's three sides to this election because RFK is, for the first time in a long time, become a popular choice as an independent. But it's always very much a conversation of left versus right. In Australia, Labor versus Liberal, or over there, the Conservatives and the Liberals. And I guess there is a merit to that argument in the sense that recognising what we just said, that sometimes it's not just one leader, but it needs to be many people who have many different strengths who come together to lead a country or to help a ship cross an ocean. It's like maybe the answer to the future of politics isn't in, the left versus the right or Biden versus Trump or Harris versus Trump, whoever it is, but it's in creating a team of people who are all the face of a campaign, who speak on different issues and matters.
Yeah.
Like, why does the president have to be the most versed person in every aspect of politics? What if there were a team of people who all had their own strengths that led a country well together? Because I'm certain that it isn't just the president who makes all the decisions. Well, there's a machine behind it, but we don't see the face of the machine.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's where it makes more sense for a political campaign where individuals, they're not really going to connect with a group. They're going to connect with one person who's the face of it, which is why that system makes sense. But that's the thing, like elections and politics in general is just for elections. That's all it is. It's just about who wins the elections, and then whatever happens in the 4 years in between elections is just leading up to the next election.
Big fucking fluke.
So it's one of those things where, yeah, I'm sure like there is the team that works here. Like you have a cabinet of ministers and people that will head up different areas who should be experts in them, aren't always experts in them. But at the end of the day, the way the system is defined that it works is you're going to have that face. Like you're going to have the person who everyone associates with being the head of whatever political party it is. It's complicated. It's probably the most I've ever talked about politics. I've just always said, like, I find it fascinating to see people's interest in it. I would dearly, dearly love to have more inspirational candidates. Yeah,
maybe we're going to have a crack.
You can. I'm staying away from it. I'll navigate the ship. I'll be there I'll be looking at the stars.
Yeah, I'd have a full head of grey hair after a year, I reckon. Anything else that you think we should talk about?
I'm really interested because, as you said, it's been a little while since we've caught up. I can't exactly remember what we were talking about on the last podcast, but we were talking more so about our combined presentation, I think, and we're talking about connection. Since then, you've been able to go and do a bit more solo speaking, which is really, really, really good to see. What are your messages over the next like we talked about being open-minded, your messages might change. What are some of the messages that have sort of come in since we last spoke, and what are you focusing on in the next little bit?
I think the biggest change has been in everything we've discussed today, in that identifying the fact that life is always evolving and changing. Probably the biggest thing for me that I've been honing in on stage is in the knowledge that you are 100% going to die, but accepting the fact that you don't know when. For most people, that looks like 80 years. For some people, it's tragically shorter. For some people, it's longer. But identifying the fact that you can't control when it will happen, but you'll certainly at one point in time exit life as you know it. If you can identify what you value right now and design your life around it, that is arguably the most impactful thing you can do to live a fulfilling life. And I'm trying to figure that out myself in my own life. Like, what do I really value right now and what's important to me, and readdressing that and encouraging people to do the same, to get off autopilot and actually investigate what a meaningful and fulfilling life looks like. We're just constantly, like, if you're aware enough of it, I'm certain that everyone would be able to touch on an experience or a story they've heard over the last 12 months that breaks their heart. You know, I just recently the other day heard that a guy that I work with down in Melbourne for nearly a year just passed away in his 40s. Was a great dude, had 2 kids, a lovely partner, like had so much going for him, such a funny, interesting and talented guy. Passed away in his 40s with a heart condition. And I'm like, I haven't seen him for a couple of years. I didn't know the shape of his life or where he was at, but I just hope it was fulfilling. I hope that in his final moments, he was able to recognize that, hey, didn't get as long as I would have liked. Man, I've done it on my terms. And so that is part of what I'm trying to do in my own life right now, is going, how can I design and rig this thing to make sure that I, at the end of time, whenever that may be, go, man, I had a good crack at that, and that was really fulfilling. And I really did that for us, for my family and for myself. And so to do that, I think you've got to continue to try things. And so I am, just recently was reminded by an experience, the importance of like leaning into new opportunity. So off the back of our engagement, we put a post up and shared the news with everyone on social media that we're connected with. And randomly off the back of it, we got a request to do a photo shoot for this wedding photo shoot. It's kind of like a collaborative project to dress up as a bride and groom and take a bunch of photos, which really made it online look like we got married. And we had to kind of put a bit of a disclaimer in the post that we're not married yet, so save you congratulations. But it was an experience I was kind of daunted by, not because of any reason other than still images are so unforgiving. And I'm not saying that I'm like fearful of selfies or taking photos or any of that, but I'm fearful of the fact that I had zero control over what shots were picked and how they're promoted, etc. We got up there on the day, Soph and I together, and we decided to embrace it because we're like, this is fun. We get to spend the day together. It's something different. We get to lean into, you know, dressing up nice and having a story to tell together. Whether it's amazing or a disaster, we'll be able to laugh about it.
Yeah.
So we go up, and it was at Lindsay House in Darling Point, so it overlooked the harbour. Gorgeous view. The house was like historic, built in the 1800s, absolutely stunning, and has so much character, and just an awesome team of people, like the best team of people. And we had so much fun. And at the end of the day, I was like, that is such a great reminder to lean into things that don't exactly make you feel comfortable, but feel exciting, feel like something that you want to taste and try. And so the next one for me that I've been thinking about so much lately is I love great comedians. Like, I get so much joy and so much peace from listening to people I find hilarious. It inspires me. It makes me see life through a lighter lens and from a different perspective. And I was just like, it's such an art and such a skill, and takes so much courage to get up on stage and deliver stand-up. Like, it is so hard to be funny.
Yeah.
In conversation, it's a little bit easier because somebody brings something up and you find it funny and you lean into it. But humour is so subjective. It's different for everyone. Like, your sense of humour may be different to mine.
Yeah.
And that's part of what makes it hard to be funny. But what if I just signed up to an open mic stand-up night and, like, for 2 weeks before the gig, like a 5-minute stand-up set or a 2-minute stand-up set, I had the mission to go, what's the funniest 5-minute stand-up set I can write? And I'm just going to lean into that experience and fully enjoy the fact that I know I'm going to be uncomfortable, that I know I'm going to have more nerves than I would have when I walk up to do a speaking gig and do the things that I'm comfortable speaking about. Why? Not because I'm trying to be a stand-up comedian. It's probably like there's very little chance of that happening, but because I think that would be an interesting process to go through. And I think I'd enjoy the experience regardless of whether I bomb or not.
Definitely. So is this you committing to it?
And I think that's why I'm saying it out loud,
okay.
because
making it real.
There's a healthy disconnect there at the moment where I'm like, oh, nobody knows about it outside of me talking to Soph. But I'm like, it makes me genuinely, like, it scares me a little bit. It makes me a bit sweaty to think,
Good.
You know, there's 99% chance that I bomb.
So have you written any jokes yet?
No jokes yet. No
I was
jokes
really
yet.
hoping to put you on the spot with that. But
the only thing, you know, the way that my brain works is like the insight perspective. I think, well, because I'm such a stories guy, I think naturally, like, me trying to deliver stand-up would be me leaning into stories and experiences I've had and trying to find the funny moments. And I guess the balance that every comedian plays with of the real and the stuff that's been sensationalized, or maybe there's a bit of mayo or GST added to it for the purpose of the humour. But I think that's probably the way that I'll lean, or the way that I'm inclined to lean.
Yeah.
But I want to play around with it a bit. Maybe like find a date first so there's a level of commitment and buy-in.
Yeah.
And then start to play around with what's the best 5-minute set I can write.
I like it. So you're going to have to clip this up, put it on your Instagram. It's your official announcement that you want to do it. And then you can be held accountable. I think it's a great thing to be able to do. Like, it's, I guess, the overall theme of what you were saying as far as what, like, the important message is to remember to live. Yeah. Like, I think, and especially in contrast with death, right? And I'm sure this has been said in a number of different times, but, like, death is determined. Like, it's going to happen to every single one of us, but living's optional. And you get a choice with what you want to do with that time. That could either be really profound, what I just said, or it's something that's been said over and over and over again, and I've just copied and pasted it. But that, I guess, is essentially what you want to remind people to do. And I think those experiences, like stepping outside of your comfort zone and doing those things that you can look back on and be like, that was scary, but it was such a great experience. I think that's something a lot of people can benefit from.
Well, I seem to believe that most of the great things that we experience in life are on the other side of a little bit of courage, on the other side of a little bit of fear. Like, it takes courage to experience those things. Like, you know, that one point in time, your wife was someone you did not know, and you had to summon the courage to create a conversation, to start a relationship. Like, I can speak to that, like that fear of, like, walking up to the first date was so like, fuck, like, this is scary, this is nerve-wracking, because I knew there was something there from the messages we had together. But I feel like in life we've lost outlets to be uncomfortable. And I think the modern answer to that is like the marathon or a fitness endeavor. Well, that's at least the popular thing at the moment. But how many people step outside of the comfort zone professionally, or just to do things that, like, they've never considered to be something they're interested in before, but, like, kind of excites them?
Yeah.
Like, I remember being 16, and it's probably 15 or 16, and, like, from a young age, sort of bummed around with guitar a little bit and had guitar lessons once a week. And then a mate of mine who had been one of my best mates from kindergarten had moved overseas for a couple of years to Thailand for his old man's job, and they'd just come back and he played guitar, learnt guitar overseas. And so we started catching up maybe like once a week, and we'd just have a bit of a jam session and, like, learn some songs together, and we'd try and make some songs, you know, like maybe the dream of being a rock star or something like that. And I remember this one day we're sitting at his joint in Kirraville, and we were just like a little bit bored of just sitting around playing. And I was like, wait, why don't we just go down to Kirraville Village and busk? See if we can make some money. And he's like, are you serious? And I'm like, yeah. And we weren't even that good. Like, in fact, we were pretty horrible. Like, we could put a few songs together, but it certainly wasn't polished. And like, we didn't know complete songs. So it was more like
an intro to Smoke on the Water. And
play the intro and then like, all right, leave it there. Next gig.
Yeah. No requests.
No requests. Yeah. Absolutely nothing outside of the set list. And he's like, all right, let's do it. So I remember we walked down to the Kirraville Village and we sit in front of, if anyone knows the area and knows the village there's the butcher and then the grocer. And we sat out the front there and we put a hat down on the ground and we started playing. And I'm not kidding, it was like the greatest fluke. But in half an hour, we'd made $50.
No way.
Yeah. And as 15-year-olds, $50 goes a long way. Like, that's lunch all week at school.
Yeah.
That's like unlimited traveller pies and sour worms, and like it's
straight to the fish and chip shop, get yourself 6 scallops,
like straight to Macca's, you know what I mean? Like, awesome. It's all those things. So we're like, this is great. And I remember feeling so, I remember Dad and Shania drove past because I told them we were going down, and that was like, they found it hilarious. And I remember going back to school on Monday, and it was such a great story to tell the boys because it was just so outside of the realm of what we'd even considered. And my mate Reese, who I was with last night, goes, I've got a set of bongos at home. Can I come next weekend? So we went back. The whole village was like a Sunday, so it was shut down. We went down to Wiseman's Bowling Club and sat up with a hat. And I remember playing for like an hour and not a cent. And then we got up to leave, and this group of oldies like yelled out to us, oh, where are you going? And we're like, oh, we're leaving because no one's paying us. And they were like, oh, if we give you a couple bucks, will you stay and play? I was like, how much are we talking? They're like, oh, well, how much of a list you got to play? And I was like,
the real estate agent, and you're coming out.
Yeah, starting to negotiate. I was
how
like,
much are you willing to
we
pay?
can play a couple of songs. They're like, do you sing? And I'm like, if you're giving us money, I can sing. So they gave us $30 and I sang a bit of Matchbox 20. And we sat around for half an hour and we had a great time. And there's like, I look back on those experiences of being young with some mates going, that's a great story because we just literally lent into the fear of who cares if it doesn't work out?
Yeah.
Like, we'll literally have a story to laugh about.
Yeah, it's the innocence that you have of youth, I guess, in a way. But I think there's also the perception that you got less to lose. Like, you don't think about the stuff you've got to lose when you're younger because you don't really have anything to lose. You might get a little bit embarrassed, but I think the fact that we think we have so much to lose is a bit of a myth when you get older. Like, if you were to go and do that, like, I mean, the comedy thing's great. Like, what have you got to lose if you go and bomb?
Well, I think it's an ego thing.
Yeah.
You have more ego when life is a little bit established and you feel like you got a tighter idea of your identity, right?
Yeah,
we spoke about before. And so part of the fear is, right, if there's someone in the crowd who knows, oh, that's Brad, the guy that's got a podcast. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
The wannabe that's got a podcast now thinks he's a fucking stand-up.
Yeah.
And, oh, he bombed. What an idiot.
Yeah. They're almost wanting you to bomb. That's what you're thinking.
That's what you're thinking, right? And so the fear is like, what if I lose a sense of my ego? And I'm not even trying to be a stand-up.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like, what if you just had the experience and it just is what it is? And there's nothing to lose. It's like that great Charlie Chaplin quote that life is a tragedy in close up and a comedy in long shot. Like, you always get the opportunity once a little bit separated from the event to look back and go, fuck, remember the time I absolutely bombed at that stand-up open mic night?
It's only ever going to be a great story.
It's 100%. Yeah. And I think that's a way to see life is until you're in a great position, like until you're married or engaged or have a great partner, only then can you look back on relationships of the past and go, remember when that felt like the biggest disaster? Yeah. And I was gutted that didn't go to plan? Or, you know, when you've got the job that you really love and you're a speaker and you go, remember the time when I worked at that cafe on the bridge in Wollongong and I literally didn't last more than 24 hours? And I just had this idea that I was going to be the biggest and best barista in town. And I was going to be slinging coffees and doing latte art. and like I wasn't all that good at wiping up the knives and the forks. Like, you know, you can look back and laugh at those things because life works out and affords you that.
Well, I think something I've been talking about a lot lately is contrasting failure with success. And I think those failures are essential. And we've talked about how much you can learn from them. But I think only when you can start to own your failures is then you can really own your successes. Like you can't have one without the other. And that for me is something that has been such a big, I guess, point of comfort in knowing that failure is fine. Like you can have those stories, you can have those experiences, and that's great.
I love what Harry Garside spoke about after the Olympics in being able to recognize that, like, when you shoot for something that means something to you and you don't achieve it, it doesn't change who you are.
No.
It's just part of the experience of life. Like, failure is important. I love that he said, and I know you're big on this too because you speak about it on stage a lot, that it's important for people to understand that failure is a part of life. Like, we don't always get it right. And arguably, when you're getting it right all the time, you're not really trying. You're not extending yourself. Like, I think it's important to, I remember off the back of last year, like, just not completing the marathon that I set out to. And there's all these excuses that come to the surface of, it's because my gut wasn't right, and it's because we're supposed to do it the next day, and then we sprung it on ourselves that afternoon and just went and did it. But that's part of the challenge. It's part of the challenge of running a marathon. It's not easy. And if it was easy, it wouldn't be a worthy accomplishment of celebrating.
Yeah.
So it's, I don't celebrate the 10K that I run every week because I know that it's not a challenge to me. It's different for everyone, right?
Yeah.
For someone that might feel like the next lofty step. But part of the beauty of it is it's worth achieving because it was difficult. So just embrace that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do more of that.
Yeah. I love it.
So, great chat.
Yeah.
2 hours flies by.
It does.
Anything that people should be looking out for? I know you've got a couple of projects in the works, but anything that's like on the near horizon?
I've got projects in the works. I've actually been doing a new presentation, which I've really, really been enjoying, that I have officially put into like my options of presentations, which is called How to Survive a Shark Attack and Other Change.
I like that.
Which has been a heap of fun. It's just an interactive workshop where the group works together to try and survive a shark attack. You learn about leadership, decision making, and working together. That's the one thing I would put in that category of things that I'm working on at the moment that I'm excited about. So
I like it. Well, hey, I'll make sure that, as always, people can find you in the show notes, the section of the pod that is often forgotten. Go check it out. But thanks for coming on again, brother.
Thanks for having me. Can't wait for number 5.
Cheers.